Hey, family. Welcome to We All Need Each Other, the podcast from Transformation Ministries.
We've got the A team on the podcast today. Allie and I are hosting. Just kidding, Dan. We love you. You're great, but we bring in the big guns today. How about that?
We're the double A team. We are the double A team.
Exactly. And today we've got a really special treat because I know when we did the teaser earlier this year, we talked about some new things that we want to do with the podcast, some new conversations that we want to have, and one of those was really spotlighting people who have had an impact through transformation and who have really made a difference in the lives of students at Transformation. And so we've got two people who have done that and who have been a part of what Transformation is doing. So a lot of you listening may know these names, may know these faces, and so we want to have more of these conversations and really go deeper into what we're trying to do as part of Transformation Ministries. So we've got Alec and Itzxul on the podcast today. How are you guys doing?
Doing great. So happy to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Likewise.
So why don't we start out and just have you guys introduce yourselves again? I know a lot of people are going to know who you are, but maybe tell us a little bit more about what you're doing now, and just give us a little bit of your backstory.
Alec, you're right up. Alphabetically first, so after you.
There you go. Yeah.
Should have seen that coming. Great. Yep. As you said, and as I think maybe you can see on the screen, my name is Alec Torigian. Like you ripped something a second time. I was just sharing actually with a book club through Transformation that my fun fact about myself is always that I was in 7th grade 6 times because I was a middle school teacher. So blessed to have gotten to dive into a career in education. So I'm originally from Minnesota. I don't know how much information is helpful, but thought I'd never leave, but have lived kind of everywhere but there for the last decade or so, and been blessed to teach middle school in 3 different places, and also blessed to work with a program that Itzxul and I currently work for called the Alliance for Catholic Education, or ACE, supporting the Catholic churches and Catholic schools' effort to help be a part of closing the opportunity gap in our country through a lot of different methods and everything from kind of teacher formation to now I'm blessed to work in what we call college persistence programming. So walking with kids from 6th grade through their college graduation, offering radical accompaniment, opportunity and formation, and just a giant fan of all things Transformation Ministries. And so really, again, grateful to be here today.
Cool. And my name is Itzxul Moreno, and I don't have a fun little way of remembering how to say that. And actually it's more of a nuanced and difficult story in trying to think of the right way to pronounce my name. I sometimes go by Itzxul and Itzxul. So I know folks at Transformation know me by both. I'm really trying to practice being more comfortable and with it with Itzxul. So we'll go with that. And I am, as Alec mentioned, a member of the ACE team at Notre Dame. Not originally from Indiana or the Midwest, but I am so proud to call it home now. I actually grew up in the Southwest in Arizona. And I love being able to talk about Southwestern things. I was just there a few days ago. I think Alec is still currently there. So that's a big part of who I am. But currently I am really committed to working with schools around the country. Right now I'm in Denver, just visiting some of our Catholic schools here that partner with us through the ACE Teaching Fellows program. And it's a really special mission for me. I think it comes back to the heart of being an educator and being someone who feels really called to be in school spaces and walk with young people in the many ways that is needed in this country right now. So a lot of overlap between my current calling and vocation and work and the calling and vocation and love that I've met through Transformation Ministries. I can't remember if there was another question to that I'm missing here.
I think that's great.
Great.
We're going to get into a lot of questions. So I think we'll have more than enough time to get into everything that you want to talk about today. Hopefully. So Allie, I'll turn it over to you. We can start diving in.
Yeah, so interesting. So really quick with the ACE, is it they're walking with schools that would be in the inner city, like at-risk schools, some of that, is that correct? Or is it kind of schools, or is it, what kind of schools is it exactly?
Yeah, that's a great question. Alec conveniently muted himself here, so I know that I'm up. But it's kind of all of the above. But yes, Allie, it is predominantly focused on working with schools that are under-resourced in some capacity. So right now we're seeing that all schools across the country need resources in all the ways. And one of the distinct privileges I think that we've seen through our mission is that our partner schools have really committed themselves to meeting families where they're at and providing whatever holistic support families need. And I think that we try to mirror that, probably appropriately so, in providing whatever holistic support our schools need through our partnerships. So there are kind of different units within ACE that work with schools, and that profile of schools that you work with depends on the unit and the mission that you're most directly speaking to. But I think for both Alec and I, we work with schools that are mostly under-resourced and serving predominantly underrepresented communities, or those communities that have been historically marginalized. So that's a little bit about the mission there.
Yeah. So what, and I'll stick with you, Itzxul, like, what is it that caused you to like have a heart to want to do this? Like what in your life, like when did you decide, like, I want to work with these students, these schools, I have a heart for this community, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I love this question. And I think that the answer changes on the day for sure, but the root of, I think, my story and kind of sense of commitment to ACE was presented to me at maybe a non-traditional time in my life when I was a student in high school. And I attended school in Phoenix, so kind of inner city area. There was a small school called Borgate Catholic, and we had ACE teachers who were serving there when I was a student there. So I came to know many of them through the program, just grew deep relationships with them. They knew my family because my family was always around. And I think there was one moment that I always think back on when we were on a spring mission trip out in the San Carlos Reservation area in Arizona. And I was sitting around the campfire with one of the ACE teachers, and I was just asking him, like, what called him to this program, like, give me like all the nuts and bolts of what this experience is. And he was telling me about it. And I just thought, like, what a tremendous opportunity for like what he can gain and what he can walk away with a free master's degree from Notre Dame. But more importantly, like how much he's offering to me, and like how much this means to me that like he is here and that he chose to like commit 2 years of his life for this, and the many other teachers who had done that too. So I think from a very young age, without even my knowing it, ACE just became such a central and core part of my identity. So went out to South Bend, went to St. Mary's College for undergrad, go Bells, very proud St. Mary's Bell. I know that some of our students are thinking of applying to St. Mary's, which is exciting. And when the time came for like post-grad plans from undergrad, I knew I wanted to do post-grad service. I knew that education was important to me. And I knew that ACE was kind of emblazoned on my heart, for lack of better words. So I applied. I was placed as a fourth grade teacher in Indianapolis, taught for 2 years at St. Philip Neri there. And then after those 2 years, I felt really called to stay. I felt it was important to keep doing the good work there. And at the same time, felt it was maybe more urgently important to like go tell about it and go try to build up that mission and invite others to come and see too. So that's what I'm doing and what I've been doing for the past 3 years. And yeah.
That's awesome. What would you say, Alec? Like, what was it that caused you to want to dive in and get involved? Like, normally these are some communities that people want to stay away from. In some ways, they're like, ooh, that's makes me nervous to be in those schools, or, those kind of things. So what made you kind of run towards it?
Yeah, no, I think it's an important question, and I'm realizing I should have practiced shortening all my stories before this, but I'll attempt to not be too long-winded. I think even though that's my tendency, I think it sounds kind of silly, but I like in recent years I've been able to kind of pinpoint it to beginning in like fourth grade, probably, in a weird way. I didn't realize it then, but I remember vividly. I was lucky to go to a small Catholic school myself growing up, and I was very into basketball. And so we had a school team, and I remember no one ever quizzed me and said like, where's your favorite school to go play at? But I remember like having a clear answer that Ascension was my favorite place for sure. It was the school in this neighborhood, North Minneapolis. which was then, is less so now, but was the predominantly Black and predominantly lower income neighborhood in Minneapolis. And as a fourth grader, I don't think I necessarily put a lot of those things together. I just knew that they had a great team to play against, and that was fun. There was always just like a very energized environment in the stands, and there were really kind people. Like even at the scorer's table, I'd be like waiting to check in, and the junior hires would like compliment my shoes, and it was just the most alive place to play, and I loved it. And then I remember being just confused because I would hear a lot of adults talking about how they hoped we wouldn't have to play there, or they hoped it wouldn't be at night. Or I'd hear referees kind of make side comments about the team or the school or the kids or the families. And then I started to notice differences in how new our jerseys were and how not new theirs were. And so there's just kind of like a seed planted, I think, and sort of this weird, first of all, how come we are getting these things that it seems like maybe they're not always? And second, why do people see them so differently? And fast forward still with the basketball through line, as a high school kid, I would read a lot of Slam magazine, just a basketball magazine. And I would read about, upbringings. And I remember particularly there was a player named Darius Miles who grew up in East St. Louis, Illinois. And I remember it was just the story of kind of just like a challenging upbringing and a really challenging school environment. And I remember having this like really strong kind of inherent thought of, shouldn't all the very best teachers want to be there? Don't we owe it to them? And I think so those seeds kind of piled up and were watered by a lot of great mentors and great experiences. And so that's a long way to say, I think all those kind of came together with the college education. That was a great kind of piecing together sort of the puzzle of just the ways that our society has kind of made various communities, or at least individuals, to kind of stand with their backs against the wall, to steal Howard Thurman's line. And so again, there was kind of this thing deep inside me that said, I thought I wanted to work for an insurance company, but I think if I could be any good at being a teacher, I would want to get trained really well and go do it somewhere that deserves a really great one that doesn't always get all the love. So I don't know if that totally answers the question, but yeah.
It does. That's really, really good.
Yeah. And I'm also struck by the fact that you are both, young people who are then going back and pouring into, even younger generations and specifically doing it through faith-based education. I want to ask about that because I didn't go to Catholic school, but I went to a very small private Christian school from first grade all the way through graduating high school. And I'm very thankful for that experience, but I know a lot of people who went through that experience and wanted to get away from that as quickly as possible, right? Just kind of wanted to go do their own thing and do something differently. I'm really just, struck by the fact that you both are pouring back into that realm and pouring back into, the next generation. What kind of drives that? I guess what I'm getting at is what is in your mind the importance of that faith-based education part of it?
You guys are going to be constantly wondering who's going to take the question.
All right, Itzxul's still on mute, so I get it. I started that. I think there's a couple pieces for me. One, I think coming back to kind of that elementary experience, I thought my school was really great. It also just was available to me largely because of a lot of boxes of privilege that I checked.
Yeah.
And so that was, again, just kind of sort of a piece of and I feel this even more strongly now that I've been a part of schools that struggle to stay open, for example. And I think often I just don't want to live in a reality where my church only serves people with the money to be served. So I think that was kind of piece one, is there's lots of flaws and lots of brokenness in the church and in the school system and everything else. But my love for it is actually, I think, kind of like, or my desire for it to be better is why I want to stay, right? To your question, Aaron, about like, why not just kind of run away? I think the other thing is because of what it's been, helps me see what maybe it could become. And I think I have a lot to learn about the broader kind of Christian church and school systems, but I know for the Catholic schools in the US, they were built predominantly first for communities that were being marginalized by the government and by the society here. And they were excellent. And we often, another line we reference often in ACE is we stand on the shoulders of giants, and think about especially a lot of nuns, like religious men and women who founded and started these schools. They built such a beautiful legacy to live out what the gospel teaches us through a ministry of education. And again, I don't want to live in a world where we've stopped doing that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's good.
I would echo a lot of those key points. And I think maybe this kind of intersects with like the backstory and personal rationale for why ACE and why Catholic schools for me. But in terms of like my own faith background and family background, my immigrant identity and just being the child of two immigrants to this country is something that is very important to me. And I don't think that I would have had like the language to say that growing up, or even truly the ability and comfort in saying that, because I grew up in Arizona, which is a hot spot for a lot of issues and things in more ways than one. And I think a lot of my young adult formation was really suppressing those identities that were more, that were perceived as more like underprivileged or underrepresented, or just like, I don't know, just like the bad people in society, quite literally, for some. And I think that it was in the space of Catholic schools, and it was through the context of the faith leaders and the just lay people primarily who worked in a mission-based place that my family found just space to grow and space to have hope. And I think, I went through kind of a few different years of transition between schools. So we did some charter school right at the beginning of elementary, and then I went to the local public school, I think for like first and second grade. And then ultimately by fifth grade, my mom decided that it was worth the sacrifice. It was important for us to be in a place that was cultivating our whole person and that could really work with our family. And she went to Our Lady of Perpetual Help in Phoenix, and they received us, and they really, from start to finish, even through my years at Bourgade afterwards, just really walked with my family, made accommodations when necessary, offered opportunities for work study when my family needed it. And I think that over time, even again, though I didn't have the language at the time or the maybe self-awareness to recognize this, really helped me kind of feel empowered, feel like those identities and spaces that I carried weren't shameful or bad or wrong, and they were actually really important and really very much a part of like this broader human tapestry. So maybe I could have gotten that through a public education, but I just don't know that my family would have felt that sense of solidarity and deeper calling to community had it not been through Catholic schools. So now on the flip side of that, I have the opportunity, and more importantly, maybe the call to walk with families in whatever ways they need, and to recognize and honor what those experiences might look like for them. So that's what keeps me here.
That is awesome. And to just back up quickly, you mentioned your family immigrated. So like where did they come from? And you said you grew up in Arizona. When and how did that all happen?
So both my folks grew up in Mexico City. So Silvia is my mom's name and Francisco is my dad's name. And they were actually neighbors in Mexico City. And they grew up in this small kind of slum-ish area called, slumish sounds weird, but it is a small slum on the outskirts of the city. And it's on this very steep hill. And they were both kind of the older children in their families. They had a lot of responsibilities between like just taking care of and raising a lot of their many younger siblings. And I think it reached a point where they realized, like, because of the great economic disparity in Mexico, lack of opportunity, like just lack of room to grow, like they just needed to find another opportunity to build their own family and to try to promote vitality for both of their families in the long run. So they made the decision to immigrate to the US, I think quite literally like the third day or so after they were married. And this always makes me laugh because they were married on June 30th. And then they began their journey to the US, and they arrived here, and they were in LA, and they looked up and they saw like all these fireworks in the sky, and they're like, what's going on? Like, why are they like, is there some big celebration, like some big holiday that we missed? Like, newly arrived immigrants in the United States, no context for the 4th of July. Kind of Thank you. Beautiful, I think, providential maybe moment for them to be arriving as new immigrants in this country. So fast forward a little bit, they moved up to Northern California with some family friends that they had there. Were working, learning English as they could. Eventually, my older sister Carla came along, and then me. So spent some time in Northern California, and then we moved to Phoenix because my dad worked in construction, and Phoenix was a booming place, still is, for construction around the 90s. So that's what kind of eventually brought us to Arizona, and we've stayed there ever since.
Wow, that is awesome. I don't know if I've ever quite heard that story and process. So that's really cool. So as you kind of shifting gears from ACE, you guys are both involved at Transformation, which we are so grateful to have you guys. Can you speak, Itzxul, I'll ask you first, and then Alec, it's coming for you, but just when you got involved in Transformation, what brought you to Transformation, and just kind of, yeah, I guess why you took that step.
Well, thank you for asking. And not just saying this to say it, but like, thank you too for being like who you are, because I think what drew me to Transformation originally was just like the people in and around it. And I chose to come back to South Bend, as I mentioned earlier, after these 2 years living in Indianapolis. Never would have thought that I would have like chosen to stay in the Midwest, chosen to stay in Indiana, but felt really called to come back and not just work for Notre Dame and be a part of this mission that's so important to me, but really be a person of South Bend first and think about the communities that would be around me and how that would be my home first. So I was just kind of like thinking and asking around to see like what opportunities existed, what were some kind of community spaces that were already kind of in that neighborhood that I was living in. And actually, Alec is the one who brought this onto my radar. So it's like you all knew this in some way, right? He and I were just kind of chatting about it at first. And I thought to myself, okay, well, like I'll just go check it out and see what, you know, they have to offer and see if it works, and definitely don't want to like overcommit and sign up for something if I can't like offer what it needs. And it's actually like pretty providential too. It was like 2 years ago. It was like almost to this date. I was in Denver for this site visit and was walking around one of the neighborhoods here and called Alec and was like, hey, Corey called me and said that they need a mentor. And I don't know, like, you know, this is all very new. And like, I really want to make sure that I'm serving them well. Maybe this isn't, I don't even know what else. I was probably just rambling and processing with Alec. And I think he helped me see that like, this was an important calling. It was an important space that the ministry that we could provide to students like was inherently good and important and like an opportunity for growth in and of itself, but also like what that space meant in terms of transformation for you and how that over time could really engender those 4 key tenets that we so deeply uphold within our community and transformation. I think that was just something I was hungering for. It was something I was ready for. I trusted Alec and what he had shared about his experience there. And yeah, I couldn't say yes fast enough and came into the mentorship role with my beautiful ASLA, who I just have been so blessed to work with. And the Purple team has just been such a gift in my life. And the following year, stepped into kind of like a leadership role with Karen Grant and Kayla August, and now Brooke Conradi. So yeah, it's been a great journey ever since.
Cool. And Alec, I promise I'm coming back to you with that, but I am curious because you mentioned your mentee, Aya, and it's so cool. Just quickly, if you could explain, because she also has a different ethnicity, and like, can you explain kind of like how it's cool that you guys are paired together, and just maybe briefly like what that's meant to you, and then Alec, we're coming back to you on that.
I'm gonna try my best to be brief with this, but to begin with, like, it's meant the world. Like, I don't know that I can be concise in expressing the ways in which like her family's faith, their beautiful modeling and devotion to family and faith within their culture has been really impactful for me. I think I was aware of the Muslim faith and kind of the key tenets and had studied it briefly in college, but coming to experience it through Aya and seeing how she so proudly holds that as a part of her identity. In some ways, like God being the ultimate recycler, like helps me embody and like take hold of identities that maybe I couldn't grasp as firmly when I was her age. So it's been really important for me to just pay attention to what that means for her. And I know that there are some, day-to-day difficulties at times with being from different spaces, right? Like maybe like the food options aren't always as representative, or the holidays don't quite match up, or whatever it may be. I think still entering those spaces with a firm commitment of creating connection and we're like just loving what you find there, whatever that needs to look like, is something that has really been taught to me by Aya and her family. And not just saying this to say it, like they are my family in South Bend. They are the people that I think about when I, imagine what my family in South Bend is. So it's been really special celebrating holidays with them and sitting with them through more difficult times too. And I don't know that I'm answering your question, but that in that otherness, we found our togetherness. And I think that we continue to grow through that.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. I think back to when Aya first joined ISI, and I remember, with their Muslim faith, and Corey was like, okay, well, we talk about the Bible here, is that going to be something that's okay with you? And her mom was like, yeah, that's okay if you talk about the Bible. And we just thought, this is so cool. And I love coming to family dinners and seeing her whole family, dressed in the way that they would dress, with the head coverings and everything. And they're sitting across the table from other people, and they have their whole family, which is a lot of people. I mean, when they all come, there's like 15 of them or so, like, and so it's just a really cool picture of that we all need each other, that we're all in this space and that we're all together. And then I love that you are her mentor, as somebody who is just able to walk alongside her in that. So, all right, Alec, we're back to you. And then answering the question of, why did you get involved in transformation? Kind of what brought that about? And
I appreciate it's just good to hear people's stories. So thank you. I think, I found out about it through an ACE friend of mine, a coworker, Garrett Mandeville, years ago. The first time I lived in South Bend and worked for ACE before moving away and coming back. But I think the first why was a combination of some of the things that you mentioned, Itzxul, but some maybe other pieces too. I think there's a combination of I kind of like wanted to scratch my teaching itch. I just missed working directly with students. Our work is really life-giving, but it's kind of indirect support. And we can get more into this if we want. But ironically, I wouldn't argue that it really necessarily does scratch the teaching itch. I think it's beautiful for a ton of other reasons. And so it's one of those great things where I maybe love it for reasons other than what I came to it for, if that makes sense, which is maybe also a great classic God thing. But I think too, Itzxul mentioned kind of just being intentional about living in South Bend. And I think if I'm honest, my first year working and living, I didn't go to Notre Dame for undergrad. Like Indiana was not really home to me other than like a little bit of training in the summers. And so my first year moving from Alabama, where I was placed, to South Bend, I think was kind of almost like a denial year where I traveled a ton for work. It was kind of a weird, funny year where my job was basically to be on the road 75% of the time. And so between that, I think just made it easy for me to say, like, when I'm not on the road, I'm just going to visit friends in Chicago. Yes, thank you. So I was driving a bus most of the year, which is a whole nother podcast, I think. So I was just kind of like, my whole first year, it was just kind of like, I'm doing the job despite South Bend almost. I wasn't anti-South Bend. I just didn't have any reason to be like for it. But then I think as I kind of settled into some routines, I started to realize just the value of building homes and how much I appreciated that when I was abroad after college and when I was in Alabama. And maybe again, thinking in this weird reverse way of, I don't want to have a world where I leave South Bend having never made it home, whenever that might be. Wanted to be more intentional about kind of practicing presence, and that overlapped kind of perfectly timed with Garrett reaching out saying, hey, I know you miss working with kids. I also know you're trying to like just be more present. Here's this thing. It was kind of mid-year. There was sort of like a need for a fill-in. So I think it was a little bit of an unusual start. But yeah, it was beautiful. Similar effects of just falling in love with the values and how they're lived out. Certainly the kids and how they form us. I think the program being called Irion Sharpens Iron is just so perfectly named. We had a dear like former student turned mentor turned assistant team leader who was transitioning to a new role, and named Christian, who's wonderful. And he, when we were all reflecting on all that he has given, the only words that I could think of were those words, right? The ways that he has sharpened the young man in the orange team, who I'm trying to represent today, but also the way that he has allowed himself to be sharpened in the process. And I think that's the best of what it's about. There we go, purple team representing as well. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but
it does. And then I have one more, Aaron, then I'll turn it over to you. But since I asked about Aya, her mentee, I do remember, Alec, when we first met you, you said, hey, I want to mentor a student. Give me the student that is the hardest, that nobody really wants to mentor, that is just the one that's gonna push back and be all sorts of hard. Like, I want to mentor that student. And Corey and I's mouths dropped open, I think, because we were like, really? Okay. And we gave you, I think, one of the hardest students. And your first experience was with him. And now you're mentoring Courtney, who is a different student than the first one. But how, just in mentoring those students and your one now, like, what do you feel like you have learned or gleaned from them? Or what has your experience with those students been like?
Yeah, hard to put into words. It's funny, I think about it so often, yet still can't figure out quite the appropriate way to express how grateful I am for them and how in awe I am of both of them. I think you hit the nail on the head. Very, very different gifts and challenges for the two of them, and almost perfectly so. My first one was just kind of like chase around the city trying to find and remind of our plans to hang out, and the second one who's like, how come we're not hanging out all the time? Both of which are great gifts of the teenage years, among other things, I suppose. But I would say that to say it's just been so special. I use the word awe. I'm truly in awe of both of them. I've gotten to know Courtney so much better because it's just been so many more years, which is a great reminder of just the gift of time and accompaniment, but awe both in what they carry and the things that just make life harder. I think often about just where I was at as a teenager and the things that were troubling my heart and mind, and it just is nowhere near it. So I think when I think about people I want to be more like, plenty of mentors, plenty of older people and teachers. But I also want to be more like Demario and Courtney, and Courtney's crew, because it's always a crew. The resilience and the joy and the brotherhood. If I wake up tomorrow and live my life a little bit more the way they do in those terms, I'll be better than I was today. I don't know if that makes sense either, but they're fun. They're just a fun group of individuals who love each other very dearly, even when they're arguing about the best basketball player.
I just wanted to pause right here and say thank you. Thank you for joining us and being here with us on the We All Need Each Other podcast. If you want to support us, please don't hesitate to stop by our website, www.transformation58.com/give. Thanks.
Alec, you mentioned, kind of that process of, deciding to stay and work in South Bend, even though maybe it was a little odd at first. That interests me as someone who, I've grown up and lived in this area my whole life. But I'm really interested to hear from both of you because you've traveled so much and experienced so many different things. South Bend, I don't know. I always feel like there's a lot of different cultures and a lot of different things going on here in the city, right? You've got everybody knows Notre Dame, but Notre Dame is kind of its own, it's not technically even in South Bend, right? There's some things like that about South Bend that I think make it a very unique place. But I would love to hear from both of you, what that process was about, making that choice to get involved with the ministry here and kind of, minister to people here in the South Bend area?
I think that it kind of comes back to the original question you asked of like, where did you grow up or where do you come from? And this actually is something that Alec helped me understand and know too, and just like the nuance of that question of like where you're from, or sorry, where you were raised and where you grew up. And I think about that a lot in terms of like, I was raised in Arizona. A large part of me like identifies with that time and space. But I really honestly think that I grew up the most in South Bend, in Indiana in general, but in South Bend in particular. Mentioned that I St. Mary's grad for those 4 years there were outside of the college time, like really difficult formative years within the context of family. And I think pushing through those challenges in that space and then being called to teach in Indianapolis and then back to South Bend in the summers for my MED formation made it feel more and more like the space in which I was growing up. And now through this role, like, yeah, you're right. Like we do kind of travel a lot, like between the two of us. We've been through quite a few cities, even just in the past week. But I can say with absolute certainty, even though I'm not like in any way either like a world traveler or savant in like all the culture things either, but I think of all the places I've visited and from what I've seen and experienced in different cities, however cool and hipster-esque they are, like the Denver that I'm currently standing in, what I love most about South Bend is that it doesn't try to be anything that it's not. And South Bend looks like South Bend. South Bend, I think, has a history that at times is difficult to bear with, that maybe akin to places like Detroit, which is a podcast in and of itself, and just my love of Detroit, or Gary that I know I've spoken with about with Alec before, like where he currently, where we just are able to really see communities that have chosen not to be stopped by anything, that you can close plants down, you can have all sorts of waves of communities coming in and out, and the effects of that may show, but the people who remain. And I see that every day, and I love that, and I want to be a part of that. So I don't know that there's any other place or city that I've visited that feels as authentic to me as South Bend does for me right now, and I'm so proud to call it home. And I'm so eager to be back there on Saturday. And I just, I'm chosen on purpose.
Yeah, it's a good question, Aaron. And it's funny that you ended that way, Itzxul, because I think there used to maybe even be a podcast called South Bend on Purpose. And I was reflecting recently that's like, honestly, again, kind of like the opposite of true for me. Like I did not choose it on purpose. I was drawn to a mission, and that mission tied with a job that was in a place. And in a weird way, I'm grateful for that too, because I think it's been a tangible reminder of the beauty of like what it really means to say that we believe God is in all things and in all places, because that means that like, on the one hand, I'm about to say why I think South Bend is in particular special, but on the other hand, I'd like to think that like we should be able to be plopped kind of wherever and find how beautiful it is, right? I know it's a little more nuanced than that, but I would say that to say I think it's been a really formative journey to switch from like South Bend, not on purpose, to like staying here and being intended, or there, I should say, I'm not there currently, but on purpose, and just diving in, I think a little bit to your question earlier, Allie, too, it connects to Aaron's just now of, I think very frequently people outside of like our sphere who've like been in South Bend enough to love it, the assumption is kind of like, oh yeah, you're there because of Notre Dame, and like South Bend, like it's just, I hope it's okay. And my thing is, first of all, like I'm kind of not the biggest drinker of the Notre Dame Kool-Aid, though I'm grateful for the things that it does and provides. But second, it's just a gift to say like, no, you don't know. Like there's such beauty, and I think often, I mean, again, just there's a theme here that I just think a lot of other people have better words than I could pick. I think about Pastor Jay's book, Church Forsaken, and the notion of seeing with bifocals, right? Like South Bend, just like every other place that I've lived and loved and called home, there's beauty to be seen, and it's often not seen and talked about. And there's challenge that we shouldn't ignore either, because that'd be disrespectful as well. And so it's been a gift to get to have enough time, and most importantly, probably the vehicle of Transformation Ministries to connect in meaningful ways. I think we all can do small things. It's been formative to dive into practicing presence by being intentional about what parks I go to or what barbershops or grocery stores. And those things I think build up beautifully, but also kind of the magnification of that process through diving into a transformation that is so intentional, that fosters so many conversations and depth. It's just been kind of almost like a great like augmenting of the process of falling in love with South Bend, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's so cool. We must be on the same wavelength here. It's almost kind of freaky that you mentioned Pastor Jay's book, Church Forsaken, because I was going to ask you about that when you were talking, and then it's like, okay, well, you're already on that wavelength there. So Alec, you're way ahead of me. But yeah, I just love that you're talking about like being able to be plopped anywhere, right? And he talks about it in the term of like the place where you're exiled, right? And that idea of Jeremiah 29. And Jesus and God is talking about like, I know you guys aren't where you want to be, right? I know the Israelites, you want to be back in your homeland, right? But this is where you're at, and I want you to kind of that grow where you're planted idea. I love that so much, and I think that's so powerful. And we had Pastor Jonathan Brooks on earlier in the life of the podcast, so he's a great friend. Yep.
Yeah. I would also just add too briefly that. First of all, that's phenomenal. And second of all, I think it's a humbling opportunity to genuinely be able to, look the Courtneys and the Ayas and whoever else in the eye and say, I think your home is beautiful. I want to come to understand how it's challenging for you also. But I think often I had read Church Forsaken before returning to teaching and moving to Chicago. And I remember riding on a field trip bus with one of my kiddos. And we were looking out the window at the same kind of building, and her just kind of saying like, oh, like it's just, I just wish we had kind of like nicer things. And to have like a complicated, nuanced conversation with a sixth grader about how the neighborhood can be beautiful and challenging all at once. And how someone who came from outside was plopped there or chose to plop there can celebrate its beauty and celebrate her tenacity in how she navigates the challenges as well as the beauty. I think it's humbling, and it's complicated because there's, I think, a lot of ways to do that wrong or clumsily. But anyway, I don't know.
No, that's beautiful. Yep, I love that.
That's awesome. So obviously you guys have both, chosen to give your life to people in spaces that are different from you. Like, you're not just in these pockets of people that everyone looks like you, everyone believes same things as you. Like, you've expanded that, and you're in different spaces. And so what value, in your opinion, is it like, what are the values of learning and interacting with people who have different backgrounds or different neighborhoods or have grown up in different spaces? And I guess what are the things that you are thankful for that have it's been because you've chosen to be in spaces that are different and diverse?
I mean, there's so many. I think one is, it's maybe on the more practical side. One is just the ability to, as like life goes on and years pass by, do a little bit better job of understanding different people's perspectives and experiences is just such an enriching way to experience life. And I think often there's a dear professor in our program who has spent a lot of his career in paying particular attention to kind of Native American schooling as it overlaps with Catholic education. And years ago, I remember there was a student of Native descent who was at an event and came up to him and mentioned where she was from. And immediately he said, "Oh, you must be of this tribe." And after they had chatted for a while and he walked away, that student turned to a colleague of mine and me, and she just kind of was like slack-jawed, and she said, "He knows my tribe." And just like this awe-filled way, which is not to say that that's anything necessarily spectacular or that, we should pat ourselves on the back when we've like gathered another piece of information that will help us with a future conversation. But the beautiful opportunity to give someone that feeling of this person cares enough and has spent enough time asking questions and being in different places to come to know my tribe. That's a pretty simple but potentially powerful gift to be able to give, especially as someone who walks around with people largely having a great understanding of the white kind of experience of life in the US. So I think about that a lot, and then I could ramble on and on, but I think just briefly the more abstract notion of if we really believe, and I think we do, that we're all made in God's image and likeness. There's a whole lot of different ways that can end up looking, which is a complicated thing, I think, to comprehend, but also such a special thing, because if that's the case and we only ever get to know one like sliver, one angle of that picture, we're just missing out, I think, so much on the bigger picture of who God is and what God looks like. And it could go on and on with stories of that too, but I don't know.
That's great. Yep.
Alec is a good friend in knowing to take the practical route, because of course I'm inclined to go into like this kind of broader theological, maybe even like just existential view of why entering into space, not just entering, but like diving into with readiness spaces that feel maybe uncomfortable at first or totally unfamiliar. I think that's what we're made for. And I know the name of this podcast is like us being made for each other, but I over and over, or again and again, come back to this notion of Ubuntu. And maybe it's something that many of us are already familiar with, but I think that just means so much to me in terms of like purpose and energy finding when we're tired and we don't need another thing to be at, or relationship to foster or whatever. At the end of the day, like this notion of Ubuntu reminds me that a person becomes a person through other people. And as I first learned it, like I am because you are, and you are because I am. And because of that, like we don't ever stop showing up, and we continue to press into the next like most uncomfortable space, not just for the sake of like always seeking that difference, but really understanding and owning the fact that you are becoming the person God called you to be by showing up to the invitations that are placed before you. And I think if you're just dedicated to paying attention to those invitations and broadening the scope and kind of similarities or lack of similarities between those invitations, then you can just see the ways in which God's call is coming to see your face, as I've heard before. And I think that that's just really important to carry with you as you meet opportunities to encounter difference.
That's good. That's good.
So I'd like to stay there, because I think you both have said some really powerful things. So Itzxul, earlier on, you said, in our otherness, we found togetherness, which I think is like, in a one sentence, like distillation, like exactly what we're trying to talk about here, right? Like that's beautiful. And then Alec, I love when you're talking about the image of God and how powerful that idea can be to this conversation. In my experience in the church, it's very easy for, and all of us can do this, maybe even subconsciously at times, to hear that and be like, okay, yes, God is fearfully and wonderfully made me. I am made in the image of God. And then we think, yeah, it's just the people that are like me that are like that. But no, we are all made in the image of God. And I think when you unpack that more, that's Itzxul, where you get to that statement of, in that otherness, we all have a togetherness in this image of God. I would love to know how you both have kind of cultivated that thinking, because to me, it's very countercultural to what our world says today, right? Like otherness is very stigmatized, and our differences are all, I just feel like every day put in front of us and made to be a negative. Like, talk through that process of kind of, how you've cultivated that thinking about people that are different than you.
I love this question. I just don't know that I have like the words to answer it right now. I don't know, I guess like in terms of like where my energy for this comes from, or like where the inner drive, I'm just trying to pay attention to like what we were told to do, right? Like to show up for people and to love them as best you can, and to encounter like the barriers to that. And it's like not this clean process that like you just show up and then you encounter difference and you learn and you grow beautifully right away. It's like quite messy. And I think that it's not easy to say these things, or like, I don't even know that like how that phrase like came to my mind in that moment. But I think like if we believe, and I know that we believe that like God is with us through this, then showing up when things are difficult and making time for the commitments that you feel called to and the relationships that you feel called to, even when they don't fit into like the clean, crisp vision that you have for your life, that I think kind of builds its own energy or creates enough incentive, at least it does for me, to keep showing up and pressing into that. I don't know that I have a better way of capturing that right now.
I know that I do not have a better way of capturing it than that. But yeah, no, I think the first thing you said, Itzxul, I think struck me too. First of all, I agreed, Aaron. It's a phenomenal question. And I think you said kind of, Itzxul, like, we're just trying to do what we were taught and told. And I had the great gift of meeting a kind of appliance salesman / street preacher recently named Homer. And he was great. About 45 of the 60 minutes spent loading a refrigerator was just kind of him just preaching, and a lot of it was just like, we got to know the assignment. We all have an assignment. We just got to know the assignment. And I think it's just it's a lot easier to say the stuff than to do it. So I think that's kind of piece one, maybe. And piece two, and again, maybe a really practical note to balance the poetry that I'm blessed with from Itzxul there, would be in teaching, we talk a lot. I think I spent a lot of time preaching to my kids that we got to do what scares us. That's what God calls us to do. We grow and we're out of our comfort zone. And I've just never known that not to be true, right? I mean, our analogy in 6th grade math was always, if I spend the whole year giving you 2 + 2, you'll be fine and you'll never get any better at math. And it's true also that if I give you calculus right now and no help, that's also not good. But if in teaching, we would call it the zone of proximal development, the middle space, right? Where we're just challenged enough that we're going to mess up sometimes and learn from that. We're going to need to ask for help sometimes and learn from that. Then that's when we grow. And so I think on the really practical note, if walking into a church that's different from your usual one is just uncomfortable enough that you're not quite sure, but doable, that's just never not going to be fruitful. And same with where you get your groceries or what you sign up to volunteer with. And I think that was, for me, true of transformation. I felt comfortable in the role as a middle school math, science, and religion teacher. I did not know what it meant to be one of many mentors, right? And so all these little opportunities to say, that scares me, that's probably some version of growth ahead. And it's going to hurt maybe, and I'm going to mess up maybe. But there's, I think, a real beauty in the fruits that come of that, in addition to, again, just like the piece that comes back to just living out this notion that we say we believe that we all look like God, like you were saying, Aaron. And there's just been constant reminders of that in really cool ways too.
That's good.
One other thought to add here, if I can, because this reminded me of this moment of the movie Forrest Gump, which maybe you're familiar with. If you're not,
Yeah.
But there's this one scene where Jenny and Forrest are chatting, and like he had come back from the war, is like decorated with all these medals, and she's like, how did you do it? Like, how did you get out of like the depths of that despair? And he's like, I'm just doing what you told me to do. Like, I just kept running. And and she, I think, then follows up by saying, like, why are you so good to me? And he's like, because you're my girl. And I think in our own way, like, we can decide like what that verb is, like what you need to just keep doing, keep showing up, keep persisting, whatever, keep resting when you need to rest, like whatever that looks like, and to do it well. And why do we do it? Because we belong to each other and we need each other. And I think that lesson is one that I don't know why that moment stood out to me from Forrest Gump, but it came back to me now as Alec was mentioning that more beautiful moment of him loading up a refrigerator with Pastor, what was his name again, Al?
Homer.
Pastor Homer. Yeah, so.
Hey, sorry to interrupt, but if you're loving this episode and you want to access any past episodes or show notes or more content, visit our website, www.transformation58.com/podcast. Okay, get back to the show.
This has been such a great conversation. I don't want it to end, but unfortunately we are quickly coming up on our time. So I do have to sneak in the one question that I always ask every podcast. So I would love to hear from both of you. You can take this as anywhere you want. Itzxul, if you want to go poetic with it, please, by all means, do it.
Reference a movie.
Or reference a movie, anything you want to do. But what is something that's just fascinating you right now? Again, could be anything, but just something that you are just really, really fascinated by at the moment.
I saw this question when you wrote it, and I was like, oh, I really hope they don't answer that because I'm totally gonna lose it. Everything fascinates me. Weirdly, like thresholds. I know that this might sound too abstract, but I think like thresholds in and of themselves, like I've just been paying a lot of attention to like different doorways and like all the many different schools that I'm coming in and out of, and just like in a practical sense, like entry points. But maybe more poetically, like threshold moments, like where you're just like on the brink of stepping into something exciting or challenging, but like you're leaving like what's behind you, but like you're entering into a space that's like beyond that. And I'm kind of fascinated by that. And I don't know what to do with that, but I have been praying about that and just thinking about that and like just wondering what that means. So it fascinates me. If you have any poems, books, songs, whatever that connect to that in some way, send them my way, because I am just kind of really fixated on that now.
That is awesome. I love that.
We're out of time, right? That's it.
We want to know, Alec, what is fascinating you currently?
A lot of things. I think I feel like I have to be honest. I feel like we've been honest the whole time so far. Yeah. I don't know if this will make sense either, which I probably said every time I've spoken, but the future of some of these ministries we're talking about fascinates me. In particular, coming back to our line of work, certainly Catholic schools and serving communities that may not have the financial means to make them happen. But then maybe more broadly, and not to like force a connection, but truly a connection. I was asked recently to share a reflection with some teachers about just like what are we trying to like build for our kids. And I think a story from my school down in Mobile came to mind, and a story from ISI came to mind, and both of them had to do with the notion that we could just always do better at this. But what if we lived in a world where every kid knew, as the Archbishop of Mobile used to say, he said, our goal is to make sure that implicitly and explicitly every kid knows that they're loved and that they can succeed. And I maybe even extend that further and say, what if they all knew that they belonged and that we were glad that they were here and that we felt connected? And the moments that I've seen Courtney and Trey and Robert do that for each other and accept that from others and offer it to others, the ways that I've seen little schools that make no sense financially do that for kids far along the autism scale, with complicated family histories or complicated experiences of education and their past. I think that's what fascinates me. What big things, what little things, what things can we do together to build a world like that? And I think just really quickly, and then you can just cut this out because there won't be time. But with that, I often think I won't cheat and tell the story about Courtney and company, just because I think it was a special moment, just like for our crew. Yeah. So I won't share that on here, but a really beautiful moment in the school context. I was down in Alabama helping my school start the school year last year. And Itzxul's probably heard the story before, but there was a nun. She was probably 70 years old. She had spent the better part of her career in the Southwest and was supposed to retire, but had a lot of energy. They brought her over to Mobile. So she was new to the school. She was kind of new to teaching at an all Black school in Southern Alabama. It was all just very different. And she was charged with teaching religion to first and second graders. And through a lot of silly things, I ended up kind of in her room for the very first lesson she was teaching. And she was teaching a set of kids. All of them but one had never even been in a faith-based school before. And so I was very intrigued to see how it'd go. And she said, we're going to talk about Mary, Jesus' mother, today. It's, the namesake of our school. And I was like, oh, it's a bold start. It's kind of a complicated one, but yeah, go for it, sister. And she says, but first you need to understand that a couple of things. One, you need to know that Mary was not white. Mary looked probably a lot more like you. She would have had darker skin. And they're kind of like giggling, they're like 6 years old. I'm like, okay, why does this matter? And I was more intrigued. But then she said, furthermore, along those lines, she said, you need to understand that God made you to look like God. And I'll never forget watching little Cash's mouth just kind of drop open, kind of beyond his little mask, his beautiful kente cloth mask. And it just like struck me, what if we lived in a world again where everyone to the age of 7 was made to believe deeply that they looked like God and that the kid next to them looked like God and that their teacher looked like God. To your point early, Allie, this, forget about politics and religion and whatever else. What would the world look like if we had more structures, more communities like that school, like ISI, that actually worked to build that reality here? I think it'd be a pretty special place. So that fascinates me.
Yeah, that right there is exactly why I always want to ask that question, because we get incredible answers like that. Thank you so much.
And now we have to stop. See, I want to keep going with those answers. But that's really
such a good point. And it reminds me, you can actually cut this out because I know that we're on time, but this is an actual poetic connection because I was just talking about it today with a friend at a school previously. But Billy Collins, the poet, has this beautiful poem on love, and it's very fitting for many of the themes here. But the poem ends by saying that, like, the reason that he wrote this entire encounter that he had just witnessed and described in the poem was because the way in which he saw someone look up at the other person was the way in which, like, the eyes of saints, I know that's particular to the Catholic faith, but the eyes of saints looked up at God when they saw God doing something that named him as God. And to kind of extend Alec's notion and see it in my own way here, like, I think it's both important to help people see that in themselves and for us to model and commit ourselves to, like, looking at others the way that God looks at them and really practicing that as a community.
That's really good.
Well, thank you both so much for being here on the podcast with us today. This has been great. And I want to thank you, one, for definitely the impact that you've had on the students at Transformation and all that you've poured, into that ministry here, but also just thank you for what you're doing, around the country through your work. It's really necessary work. And so, yeah, thank you again for taking some time out and talking with us.
Thank you. It's super, super fun stuff to be a part of. And I'm excited to track you both down and throw all the same questions back your way sometime.
There you go. Yeah.
At you. Thank you both for being here. And I'm just so grateful to have this space with you all. So yeah, your part 2 is coming up soon. We'll switch the roles here.